Hi, welcome to Rotary Vise Techniques Part 3. I'm Raj Kletke, and we'll be covering some basics that I want you to be sure to understand before we get into specific techniques for the rotary vise in the next video. Holding the scissors in your right hand keeps them easily available for cutting without having to hunt on your desk for your scissors. Put the one ring in your ring finger, the other ring in the palm of your hand, and this allows plenty of space to hold a bobbin in the palm of your hand and use your index finger and thumb in the usual fashion for any of your tying. When you do want to cut, all you do is release the bobbin, put your thumb into the other ring of the scissors, and use your index finger for the accurate placement of the tips of the scissors. Most tying threads are actually slightly flat. To demonstrate, I'll be using this ribbon, which is obviously very flat. When you wrap your thread around the hook shank, it picks up a twist. The more you wrap it, the greater the twist becomes. Eventually, you have a highly twisted and basically round thread. There may be some subtle differences between tying with a round thread versus tying with a flat thread, but the greater concern is the loss of thread control when you try to tie with a loose wrap. This thread kick tends to be away from the tie-in point next to your fingers. We'll discuss ways of dealing with this thread kick later in this video. The hook shank should be covered with thread to prevent materials from slipping around a bare hook shank. Some start at the bend of the hook. However, I prefer to start at the eye of the hook. After wrapping one loop of thread around my left index finger for a good grip, which I'll need later, I wind a few winds forward, leaving one eye length of bare hook shank at the front. Then I wrap back to lock my thread in place. The bare hook at the eye allows me to do a distribution wrap later if I desire, and reminds me not to crowd the eye of the hook. Holding the tailing thread tight at approximately 45 degrees allows the winding thread to slide down the created angle, giving a nice smooth base as you wind towards the bend of the hook. When you've covered the shank of the hook, you can clip the excess thread off with scissors, but with the weaker threads, it's quicker to snap the thread off. If you snap the thread perpendicular to the hook shank, you will often break a small hook. Therefore, be sure to snap the thread parallel to the hook shank. A quick snap will often move your base of thread a little forward, but a few wraps will take you back to where you want to tie in the tail. I'm using this slightly oversized shuck for tailing material for demonstration purposes. You can see that I've lost control of the thread due to the thread kick. This can be partially overcome by using a loose loop pinch wrap. You pinch the material tightly to the top of the hook and then bring the thread up and down in the pinch before pulling tight. The problem is that you cannot precisely see the tie-in point. However, it does leave the material on the top of the shank, and a few extra wraps binds it tightly in place. Thread kick does not create a problem the way I normally tie in a shuck. I allow the thread kick to take the thread forward, make a few loose wraps around the shuck near the front of the hook before pulling the shuck into place and using tight wraps that I can precisely place to the tail tie-in point that I want. The most common method I use for putting on tails is to take the tail material, in this case fibers, make sure they're the proper length, and then precisely align the length of the tail with the precise tie-in point on the hook shank. I then pinch those materials tightly on the near side of the hook and allow thread tension to carry those fibers to the top of the hook. A few extra wraps of the thread, and it's bound tightly in place. Now that the tail materials are bound in place, the excess tail material has to be removed. Most commonly, this would be done with scissors, cutting above the hook shank, being careful not to cut the thread. If a smooth cut is desired, you can use simply the top blade and shear off the material. With some of the soft fibers, I simply remove it by snapping these fibers off. Again, the snap has to be in the direction of the hook shank, but is quick and easy and leaves a nice base. Thread kick can become a significant issue near the eye of the hook. For example, we'll be tying in the wing of an Alcaracatus. As you don't want the hair to slip around the bare hook shank that we left previously, the first thing to do is to cover that bare hook shank and then reposition your thread to the wanted tie-in point. In the classical way of putting on an Alcaracatus, you put the previously stacked hair, pinch it tightly to the top, make a loose wrap, and pull the thread, flaring the hair. This hair is later gathered and cut into a neat head. I believe it's far simpler to pre-cut the hair. When you pre-cut the hair, you can pinch it tightly in place, but now the thread kick tends to make you lose control of the thread. You can try a tight wrap, but the tight wrap tends to push the hair to the far side of the hook. The easiest way to handle this is twist your bobbin in the counterclockwise direction, looking from above. This untwists the normal twist in the thread and retwists it in the opposite direction, which now kicks the thread towards your fingers. You can then precisely place a loose wrap, pull tightly, which flares the hair, making a nice head. Once that's bound in place, you can pull that head hair back and tie off your thread at the eye of the hook in the usual fashion. This is a larger hook for demonstration purposes, but I have left some bare shank near the eye of the hook. Most commonly, a distribution wrap would be done on a small hook where the hackle is too large for wrapping in the standard fashion. The easiest way to do a distribution wrap is to clip the center stem of a hackle that you want to use, and then get the fibers together in a vertical bundle. I like to measure for length on the far side of the hook. There are some people that will put it on the near side, but I feel I have better control on the far side. After again making sure the length is where I want it to be, I use the thread to try to catch a few fibers near the top of the hook. If I'm having trouble with thread control, I may have to spin the thread in a counterclockwise direction to get a little thread kick, and then catch the top fibers and use thread tension to bring the rest of the hackle totally around the hook shank. After that, I can put a few more wraps in place to hold it tightly, and then I could cut off the excess material. But with some of the weaker fibers, again, it is quicker to simply snap the material in the direction of the hook shank. This gives a nice, neat base, and you can tie off and have your distributed hackle complete. A distribution wrap is not limited to a center-cut hackle. These are fibers from the same hackle and can be positioned very similar in a vertical bundle, again using thread tension to wrap the fibers around the hook shank, again leaving a distributed collar. Thanks for watching the basics. In the next video, we'll use the rotary vise extensively as we tie on various fly bodies. See you for rotary vise technique.